Hey, welcome to another episode of Taboo Tuesday. I am your host, Sophia Finster, and we usually have a guest, but this week we do not. I think that's somewhat fitting for this topic, but also I'd love to talk about it again with others. This is a topic that is very seasonal, as the topic is seasonal depression. Some people call it seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. Again, a nice acronym there. And I am somebody who has experienced this before, to varying degrees. Research does show that when we have shorter days, it affects us as humans, and that's that. I am going to be talking about this amazing book, Lost Connections. I've talked about it a lot the past, almost 3 years now. The first time I had rather serious seasonal depression, my mom bought this book for me. And it talks about depression in general, but seasonal depression is a type of a depression. All right, so also fitting for today, I am feeling super sleepy. I pretty much stayed in bed the whole day, mostly because I didn't get enough sleep. I did do some things today, so not trying to be too dramatic, but I just figured it was fitting for this topic to be seasonal depression. Today's episode, so one of the facts that it took me 3 winters experiencing seasonal depression before I researched that it tends to start affecting people around October, which is, again, this month or right now, and it tends to not affect people as much as the spring comes. So March, April is when it tends to lift. But again, those are trends. People can also experience seasonal depression in seasons that aren't the winter. But just since we're coming to the winter. As somebody who knows that I've experienced this in the past, I've talked to my therapist about, okay, how do I get ahead of this? And it's good to know that just because you've experienced seasonal depression once does not necessarily mean that it's going to happen again. And again, remember that there's all sorts of different ways that having less sunlight in our life and shorter days affects us. So whether or not you call it a disorder or a depression, it is really good to keep your mental health and self-care at the top of your mind. One fun fact about self-care, I learned this recently from my lovely friend Sierra at her Unlock Your Story Wellness Weekend to celebrate 1 year of her company. Congratulations. That self-care actually became popularized by the Black Panther movement because society and the government was not caring for themselves. Therefore, they had to focus on self-care. But that's another episode, hopefully co-hosted by Sierra herself. I'm already getting sidetracked. This is a commonality that I kind of appreciate about myself. But anyways, getting back to depression and seasonal depression, this book was, I'm going to just go ahead and say, life-changing for me. I've gone back and reread parts of it several times. My book is all marked up. I have underlines and pages, corners turned of the pages. The first chunk of the book talks about antidepressants. And a lot of the, problems when it comes to antidepressants. The author, Johann Hari, has been on antidepressants for most of his life, I believe, so he's definitely not taking the stance antidepressants don't work or anything like that, but he does dig into the fact that in the US, for an antidepressant to get on the market, I believe it only takes 1 or 2 successful trials, and a company can run 100 trials and only have 1 or 2 successful trials and get it on the market. Another memorable thing was that there is a limit on how much people are allowed to get paid for these studies. So a lot of the times, to incentivize people to become a part of trial studies for antidepressants, they offer other incentives such as food and a warm bed at night. And that tends to attract people that would be less motivated by a financial incentive and actually are looking for things like a bed to sleep in at night and food to put in their mouths. So that is already a skewed population to run a study on. And then the next chunk of the book, it's chunked into 3 different parts. Let me actually give you the titles of those here. Yes, so the first part about antidepressants is part 1, the crack in the old story. And the second part is part 2, disconnection. 9 causes of depression and anxiety. And he says that these definitely aren't the only 9 causes. These are some of the most scientifically researched causes, which I really appreciate. He puts a lot of science in this book, notes a lot of different scientific studies, and also sometimes talks about how things have changed over time because our society is getting more and more disconnected in all these ways. But the third chunk is actually reconnection. So I'll read you the chapters in part 2, disconnection, 9 causes of depression and anxiety. Cause 1, disconnection from meaningful work. Cause 2, disconnection from other people. Cause 3, disconnection from meaningful values. Cause 4, disconnection from childhood trauma. Cause 5, disconnection from status and respect. Cause 6, disconnection from the natural world. Cause 7, disconnection from a hopeful or secure future. And finally, cause 8 and 9, the real role of genes and brain changes. So a few of those that I have been especially focused on lately are disconnection from other people and, well, rather, let me just pick 2. I'm going to limit myself here. I've been focusing on disconnection from meaningful values and reconnection with meaningful values, as well as disconnection from the natural world and reconnecting with the natural world. So then, that's all pretty, tricky to read sometimes. It's not always the happiest book, but part 3 really brings it home. Part 3 is reconnection, or a different kind of antidepressant. So this is one thing that I love. I have gone into the doctor and expressed that I am depressed. You guys might be familiar with the standard, 10, 15 question for antidepressant screening. I personally have never loved anything like the Myers-Briggs or anything that puts you into a box based on questions. So I don't know. I think it's a little way too simplistic of a test, but it is something, and I'll give them that. It is helpful to have simple tools to use also. But I remember I went into my doctor, I told her a little bit about what was going on in my life, and then probably within 2 to 5 minutes, she talked to me about getting on antidepressants. And she was ready to write me a prescription right there. And I was just a little shocked. I was like, you've only heard 2 minutes of my story. Like, how do you know which type of antidepressant? Like, I, at the time, didn't know much about antidepressants. I'm still not going to call myself anywhere near an expert on antidepressants. But I'd heard stories of people getting addicted to them, of people needing to keep on upping the dosage. I'd heard stories of them working. I'd heard stories of them not working. So my response was like, is there, are there other options? Can you tell me more? Like, I was very hesitant, I suppose, is the way to put it. And essentially she said that I could go see a psychiatrist, and she was still offering to write me a prescription right there and then. And I was definitely tempting, because when you're depressed, life is hard, and if somebody offers you a pill that is the answer that can help you feel better, that is very, very tempting. And I think a lot of people want that. And I think perhaps it's a little bit too idealistic. I know a lot of close friends of mine who have been on antidepressants, and some think that it helps and some don't. And, that's that. And so I asked my doctor, what perhaps else could I do in my life to help my depression? I told her I was already seeing a therapist, and she very casually said, like, oh yeah, like eat healthy and like get outside. And I was just a little shocked at the lack of non-drug-based solutions that she was going to talk to me about. So getting back to reconnection, this is actually ways you can help heal your depression, your seasonal depression, without actual drugs or antidepressants. So I think that's pretty cool, and there's a lot of scientific research on the amazing ways that this can help people. All right, reconnection 1, to other people. Reconnection 2, social prescribing. Reconnection 3, to meaningful work. Reconnection 4, to meaningful values. Reconnection 5, sympathetic joy and overcoming addiction to the self. Reconnection 6, acknowledging and overcoming childhood trauma. Reconnection 7, restoring the future. And then it goes into a conclusion. So as I noted, the 2 that I'm leaning into right now are reconnecting with my meaningful values, and then reconnecting with nature. I know that's not a specific chapter here, but in part 2, they do talk about disconnection from nature. So I'm going to go ahead and read a little excerpt from Reconnection 4, to meaningful values. After I read this book for the first time, I could not stop talking about it. I think I got at least 10 of my friends, plus my therapist, to buy the book and read it. So could not recommend this book more. Okay, so reconnection to meaningful values. This is a story about our values and money. So essentially, it talks about how in some places in the world, advertising billboards are just not allowed. There's a great quote that says there were protests in London to try to get billboards from, it was specifically protesting one billboard that said, "Are you beach body ready?" next to a stereotypical and possibly thin woman. And the protest was advertising shits in your head. And it starts thinking about money and advertising and money and values. So this guy named Nathan, his task was to go into schools and talk to families about money. And he was really curious, why do these kids so need Nike shoes versus off-brand? Why do they need these fancy branded goods that are the exactly same thing as something without the brand? Like, what is going on with their values here? What is this ravenous hunger for stuff that we have? So he starts talking about these families, or talking with these families, and he says often the teenagers would say they craved this stuff so badly because they wanted to belong. So they felt like having this stuff would help them feel that sense of belonging. And I think we've all felt the pain of not belonging or feeling left out, and that's really hard to sit with. So, I mean, that's capitalism, right? Attaching our need for stuff with our sense of belonging. That's pretty powerful. We see the average American is exposed to up to 5,000 advertising impressions a day, from billboards to logos on a t-shirt to TV advertisements. It's the sea in which we swim. The narrative is, if you buy this thing, it'll yield more happiness, and thousands of times a day, you're just surrounded with that message. So you can't really get away with that narrative of buy this stuff and you'll be happy. But as he says, we think that it fills some sort of loneliness gap in us, but it's really just a quickly, rapidly evaporating high. And I think we've all felt this, right? We've had that impulse purchase that feels great, and then the next day, maybe the next week, we're like, why did we spend our money on this? I'm not actually happy. So there was actually a study to try to reduce people's materialism, and they were trying to see, okay, so we live in a materialistic society. Can we actually make a change in our life and become become less materialistic, and how in turn does that affect our happiness? So this study was basically asking, could they nurture more meaningful values? And it was an experiment where they were actually being coached through this. So they didn't just do this on their own. They were having workshops and critical conversations to really think about their values. And Nathan, who did the study, says that these people in the study could never have made these changes alone. So it does often take a lot of help to reassess your values and change them. But indeed, they were able to change their values, and they were able to actually increase their happiness by becoming less materialistic. So that is going to be actually the topic of another Taboo Tuesday episode with my friend Katie that we're going to record this week, talking about meaningful values and money. That is a big one that I've been focusing on in my life. But again, coming back to seasonal depression, I want to end with a few things that I'm doing through these next 6 months or so to take the best care of Sophia as I can. I am doing my best to continue to take my multivitamin. I also take a reishi supplement, which is a mushroom potion, I guess I'm gonna call it. Some good mushroom shleim. I am trying my best to spend at least 20 minutes outside before noon and actually get some good natural light. I also have a happy lamp that I use when I'm on my computer in the morning. It also actually makes a great light for my Zoom calls or any virtual engagements that I am doing that morning. I'm trying to stay active and keep moving. I'm doing my best to meditate every day, and these are things that I've been nourishing in my life for a while, so I would never recommend that if you're not doing any of these things, switch and do all of them. Just because they work for me doesn't necessarily mean that they'll work for you either. So, try out what works for you. I am doing my best to actively practice gratitude. I heard on a podcast the other day that practicing gratitude and writing it down and being specific can actually help combat our negativity bias, which we all have as humans. And then I'm really focusing on being honest with myself and listening to myself. Like I mentioned before, I was really sleepy today, and I let myself sleep. I let myself take it easy. I noticed the thoughts in my head starting to judge, oh, you're not being productive. But you really just have to let that go. And that is that. So that is all for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know if you have any ideas for Taboo Tuesday, and I will see you next week.